On this episode of the After the Timeout podcast, we are talking player development and shooting. And who better to talk shooting with than NBA shooting coach Dave Love. Coach Love has worked with multiple NBA teams and players and has traveled the world teaching the process of building a better jump shot. Let's jump right in and pick Coach Love's brain. And as always, thanks for listening to the After the Timeout podcast. So let's start out with our opening tip, Coach. We wanted you to just kind of take us through your story and your path to becoming a shooting coach, and kind of what the journey was like, and maybe how you started making those connections with those NBA teams at first.
Really, the connection and the journey starts with one person, and his name is Chip Engelland, and he's the shooting coach in San Antonio. And if you're outside NBA circles, there's a chance you haven't heard of Chip. And if you are inside NBA circles, Chip is the best shooting coach in the world. And he's just a private guy. And I was fortunate enough that I met him as a 13-year-old kid when I was just a fan of the minor league team that he played for in my city. And then that evolved into I was a ball boy for the team that he played for. And we had 5 years of just being around each other consistently. And he's just the kind of guy that loves people. And I loved him. There was Larry Bird and there was Chip Engelland. Those were my two idols. And I got to know the second one. And so he started inviting me to practice after, and we'd have shooting contests after practice, and that would turn into him teaching me about shooting. Now, my dad was a high school coach and taught me beef. And then Chip starts to peel back the layers, and I go, wow, there's a lot more to shooting than just beef. And I idolized the guy, and so I was happy to learn anything. And he was fantastic. Friendship has gone on now 35 years. And he was fantastic about just sort of keeping me on track with what's the next step. And that started off as a player. And then my playing career ended, and he started to encourage me to start to use this information that he'd given me over the years. And that was like start a 1 week summer camp for kids. And I think the first idea was even like, just do something like all sports. And then it just became more and more focused. And I think he was sort of mining in our conversations for what do you love to do? And I really loved the shooting aspect of it. And he was building his career as a shooting coach at that time. He had gone from a minor league player to helping out his friend Steve Kerr when Steve still played for the Bulls, and then turning that into working privately with Grant Hill, and then turning that into the Denver Nuggets and then into the San Antonio Spurs. And my goal as I grew was just to kind of be the Calgary, Canada version of Chip Engelland, until one day he provided the first NBA opportunity. And from there, it's just been the connections that you make along the journey that open up the next opportunities.
That is a very cool story, Coach. I like your two idols there between Larry and Chip. That's some well-known names there. So we want to start with you just from the ground up. So, let's say, you're working, even a coach is working with a high school kid. Obviously you talked about beef. One of my assistants teaches beef. That's funny you said beef, but when you are teaching shooting and you're starting from the ground up, where do you begin? What are you looking at, whether it's body posture, placement, or hand placement, or how are you beginning?
The first thing I watch is the ball, because the ball is really what matters. Our body is in certain positions, making certain moves to get the ball to do a certain thing. And it really doesn't matter what positions and body posture we're in, if we can get the ball to do the right thing. And we need enough lift on the ball to have the ball have a chance to go through a fairly large target. And then I watch the spin of the ball to see, is their hand pushing the ball the middle of the ball towards the target. If it does, we get pure rotation. And if the hand isn't pushing the ball towards the middle of the ball towards the target, is pushing one side of the ball away from the target and then snapping the wrist back in the opposite direction, which we all do to a certain degree. Very few people have perfect backspin. Then that starts to give me clues as to what might be flawed in the body positions or the body movements. So I start with the ball, and unfortunately, the spin of the ball is actually an optical illusion, and so if the seams are misaligned in the correct in the right way, then it can make it look like you have perfect backspin when you don't. And if the spins aren't aligned, then it looks like you have incorrect backspin when you do have good backspin. And so that's tough, but the more you watch, the better you get at figuring out how the ball is actually spinning, and then using those clues to say, okay, I'm seeing it spin in this direction, or the tilt of the axis in this way. What is likely causing that? Checking that body part. And then from there, I'm usually focusing on what I call the connections. How does the hand connect to the basketball? How do the feet connect to the floor? Those are the only two things that we're touching, and those are the biggest energy transfers in our body. The feet pushing into the floor, the hand pushing the basketball. And so if you're going to make a mistake and it's in one of those two areas, that's probably the biggest mistake that the player can be making. You make something that's away from the basketball or the floor, probably not a lot of energy transfer that goes on there. So not to say it doesn't matter, but it might not be as big.
And I think that's interesting, because I think when you talk to most coaches, I think the first thing they would say is, someone's feet or hand placement or the L, or, all those things. So I think that's interesting that you start with the ball. And I think that's so true. I guess defensively, we tell people all the time, we're not worried about the player going in the basket. We're worried about the ball going in the basket. So when we shoot, we might as well focus on the ball. My follow-up to that for you is, what are you telling them with their eyes? What are you telling them to aim for?
I pick the long target. And so I encourage players, find that ring where the netting attaches to the rim, those little coils, and find the farthest one from you, no matter where you're standing. And if you happen to have like you've got two a little bit off center and nothing in the middle, well, then just split the difference between those two coils. But look for one of the coils and pick the farthest one from you, because the only thing we know for sure in the game of basketball, you're going to get tired. And so we want to have the luxury of getting tired, but having room to miss short. And I don't want to give you a target at the front of the rim where you have no wiggle room to miss short, and expect you to execute that when you're tired as well. So long target, the farthest coil from the hoop. And then I think the same things that a lot of coaches teach, which would just be find that target as early as you possibly can.
All right, so I wanted to talk about maybe some of the misconceptions that you feel are taught by coaches when it comes to shooting. And then on the player side, like say you're walking into the gym, right? You're just walking in to see some coach's team. What are maybe the most common flaws you're going to see in shooters? And I think you kind of maybe talked about it a little bit already, but those two aspects, the coach's aspect and then the player aspect.
The both of them, I think, are kind of the same idea. We don't have a great understanding of how to learn. We kind of have a good idea of what we need to learn, like what habits need to be improved. But I think we're very early on as a what do we call the group of, as a society of coaches and players. I can't think of a better word for us, but as a group of us, I think we're very early on in still figuring out how to coach a habit, how to improve. And so that's what I spent early COVID quarantine doing, was learning about the science of skill acquisition. And I learned that some of the things that I did intuitively as a coach to help a player build a habit were on the money, and a couple of them were way off base. And the biggest one that I see is just too much block practice of form shooting that doesn't transfer to a game. Now, I do entire workouts of form shooting. I am not saying form shooting doesn't matter. All I'm saying is if you're standing 5 feet from the rim with your hand tucked behind your back, and you're doing that for X amount of time, and then your next level is to jump to game shots from game spots at game speed, that's a gigantic leap to ask a habit to have to transfer itself. And what we should be doing in our practice is building a bridge between those two things, where we might start with a very isolated situation, a very form shooting situation, but then we go through a series of progressions to add complexity and add realism to the situation so that we can teach the habit to transfer from one to the other, to the other, to the other, to a game. And if we're not building that bridge, we're expecting the player who's probably not thinking to transfer the habit themselves, or the habit that doesn't have a brain to transfer the habit itself. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I see is people doing mindless form shooting with no purpose behind it, and then jumping from the stationary car to the Formula One car at top speed.
Yeah, I really liked it. I really liked that example. I used to coach baseball. It's the same thing. I would have kids come in. Why do I have to hit off the tee? Well, if you can't hit off the tee, you can't hit short toss flips, right? You can't hit short toss flips. You can't hit batting practice. You can't hit batting practice. You can't hit, and
Right.
they always everybody wanted to skip the steps. So I want to be, I guess we use Mike Trout today, right? And hit home runs. So I really like the bridging the gap.
Yeah, if throw me the 95-mile-an-hour fastball, coach, and I'll learn how to hit it is like I'm going to learn to shoot threes by shooting logo threes, which is, and this is where the analogy I think really starts to make sense for players, which is exactly the same as I'm going to learn how to bench press 250 pounds by putting 250 pounds on the bar and figuring it out. Well, if you can only bench press 125 pounds and we put 250 on the bar, what's going to happen? You're going to be in the hospital.
Right.
Now, the shooting version of this, you don't end up in the hospital, but your shot does. And then we have to figure out how to make your shot healthy again, because you develop so many habits. Just focus on energy creation in any direction, because we need it all. That you didn't focus on any energy creation in the correct direction that actually helps us make shots. And so it's not as simple as just form shooting all the time. We want to add complexity to the form shooting. You can't just bench press 125 pounds the entire time and expect that's going to create 250. But you have to actually add weight to the bar, and we need to very quickly on in the process add complexity to the form shooting as well.
So would you say? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, John.
No, you're okay. I was gonna just add, building off Todd in your conversation, do you feel like this evolution of the 3-point shot and so many threes, do you feel like it's developing these bad habits per se, just because of the evolution of now, instead of, in the 80s, everybody wanted to dunk like Mike and Dominique, and now everybody wants to shoot the three like Steph? Do you feel like that's developing some bad habits?
Not really. I think that's the nature of youth. Is like, I remember you say in the 80s, everybody wanted to dunk like Michael, except for me, and then the second we all got in the gym, we all realized we can't dunk. So there's this line around the 3-point, let's see how far we can throw the ball. And I remember coaches telling me constantly, like, move in, move in, move in, move in. And I think that's the nature of youth. And that's the nature of I think that's probably always been there and probably always will. And if anything, I think this emphasis on 3-point shots now is a good thing for shooting. It's inspired people that they want, oh, this is a way anybody can become great. Like, we can't all be 6'9" with a 42-inch vertical leap, but can we all spend enough time in the gym where we become knockdown shooters? I think so. So you net all of us average 6 foot guys now have a chance.
All right, so let's talk about the process of making corrections, right? How long do you feel it takes for that correction to take place, where it becomes habit, where it becomes muscle memory, right? And then what do you, if someone's reluctant to change in the beginning, how are you helping them kind of see that path towards, where they're going?
Remind me of the reluctancy question, because this is a big one, and this is an important one, and I'm going to forget because you gave me the 2 questions there.
Yeah,
so
I will.
The first one, what does the process look like? And we'll come back to the reluctancy thing in a second. For me, the process, what I try and keep in mind is 3 things. I want to identify what we're working on, and I want to be very clear about what it is and hold players very accountable to doing it. If we want to get better, we actually have to change habits. We can't just identify the thing that we say we're working on and then allow players to continue to shoot the same shot with the same habits and expect improvement. That's not going to work. And it's really hard for players to feel that. I have players all the time who I identify something and we start to work on it. And then they say, just give me let me see if I can transfer it into a game set. And they do something way too hard for themselves. And they say, how'd that look? That felt better. That was good, right? And I have to go, nope, that was your old shot. It felt different for you, but it was not different. And that's hard. So first thing we got to identify. The next thing we have to do is we have to isolate. We have to simplify the situation enough that the player is actually able to do that new thing. So I have to create an environment where they are actually able to get their feet wider or get their guide hand off the ball or lift their elbow or whatever habit it is that we've identified, and actually put them in a situation where they can do the thing that we say that we're working on. Okay. And when I say isolate the habit, that can mean what we picture when we say form shooting, like 8 feet from the basket, hand behind the back, stationary, that it can mean that, but it doesn't have to. It means simplify the situation enough that the motor pattern has a chance to change. And that could just be done with slower movement and a guided defender off the dribble rather than going all the way back to form shooting. So then the last thing, once you've started to isolate it, that the player is starting to change the movement pattern, then we have to start to layer drills. And this is something that I start to do almost immediately. Like the second that a player shoots 3 better shots, not even perfect, just better shots at whatever habit that we're working on, I start to play with 7 different layers. And the layers are distance, speed, movement, catches, dribbles, defenders, and decisions. And I picture in my brain how this makes sense to me. I picture a music producer's board where they've got all these faders, and each one of those 7 things is a fader. And my job is to increase the difficulty of the environment as the player improves the habit, but keeping it simple where I need to so that they can actually execute the habit correctly. And so I can start to add defenders to form shooting. I can start to add movement to form shooting. I can start to add distance and speed to form shooting to slowly make this more difficult. And it starts with just, okay, 5 shots of that, okay, that's looking better. Take a step back. Okay, just hop to your left and then do this form shooting drill. Like it starts that simple, but instead of doing the same thing over and over and over again, you're adding a little bit of variability to it. Hopefully more variability as time goes by, and more complexity as they get better at the skill. So isolate, or identify, isolate, and then layer. Then, okay, what was the second question again?
Before we go, could you just give us those 7 variables again? I thought those was really cool. Just so maybe if our listeners didn't get it the first time.
No, I can't. I only say things once. I'm joking. They are distance, speed, movement, dribbles and catches, and then defenders and decisions. So you can take away or add any one of those 7 things to make a drill more difficult or simpler. And you're searching for, I forget what the skill acquisition people call this window, the sweet spot. I call it the appropriate level of challenge. And it's just like, if you're practicing something that's too easy, a player can do it 90% of the time, then that's not realistic enough. It's not challenging enough. You need to make that drill harder. If you're practicing something and a player is never doing it correctly or never making shots, you're practicing something too hard, you're outside the window on the other side. You want to be in that challenge window where the player can get it right often, but not always. They know when they're making the mistake. They get good, but not incredible results. And that's where our window is. The more time.
So the second part was when somebody's reluctant to start making those changes, right? You're working with someone and they're not feeling it. They're not seeing it. They kind of stuck in their ways. How are you working with that player?
Well, the first thing I have to figure out is why are they reluctant? And there's a few different possible reasons why. And each one I will attack differently. Like I shouldn't say attack. That sounds very aggressive. I'll approach differently. And so possible solutions or possible reasons why they're reluctant. They already think they're a good shooter. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Maybe like as coaches, we tend to say like, what's the old analogy? When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And sometimes we fall into that as coaches. We're flawed too, and we want to fix everybody, and sometimes they don't need fixing. Sometimes they look different, but they get great results. People probably wanted to fix Reggie Miller's jump shot, and that would have been a mistake. He got results with it, even though it might not have looked right. The player might be misguided. They think they're good and they're not. Now, the way that we handle that situation is to gently and honestly enlighten the player that you're not the knockdown shooter that you think you are, and you need to improve. So the way that you handle that would be very different from somebody who trying to pick one of the other reasons somebody might be hesitant. They feel like, or they don't trust you. They've got other people giving advice and they don't think you're the person that's going to be able to help them. Well, then I need to educate them about me. And it has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with me. And I have to teach them about that. So really, you got to find out which battle you're fighting. Why are they hesitant? Maybe they're hesitant because basketball is fun to them. And they are only seeing the end of the road is next year. And the only reason that they're playing is because their friends play. And the idea of spending time in an empty gym by themselves, working on their shot, which they're never going to use after next year, probably sounds like torture. And so, okay, that's the battle that we're fighting. And so find out what that battle is, and then figure out how to attack if it's appropriate to attack from there.
Well, and I would also assume, at least when you're working with college guys, pro guys, that the advancement in all the analytics and the numbers probably helps that cause a little bit too, saying, hey, this is the numbers, this is the facts, this is your shot chart, things like that.
Yeah, there's two things that don't lie: statistics and video. And so you show a player, hey, here's you're a good shooter. That's what you believe. Here's last season's stats, and on X number of attempts, you shot 62% from the free throw line and 24% from three. Is that what a good shooter looks like? Okay, now you're telling me you're a good shooter. I don't care about empty gym. I care about in game. And can you execute in game? And unfortunately, last season you showed you can't. And I wouldn't necessarily be this craft, but I'd be this honest, and it might be a little more gentle, but I'd be this honest about it. And then showing them the video and explaining the physics of shooting. Like, your hand is over on the side of the basketball, and you're pushing with your guide hand to compensate. Can you see that? Yeah. Two variables, each pushing the ball away from the hoop. Is that the best way to get the ball to go towards the hoop when you have to do it really, really quickly in hard situations? Like, people are smart. If you can show them the facts, they can figure it out for themselves. And now you're on their side a little bit more.
So we kind of wanted to shift the episode a little bit into just different aspects of shooting. So we kind of wanted to talk about what are some things that you see defensively that are done to disrupt a really good shooter, and what are some things you see that really good shooters do to kind of counter those things defensively?
I'm horrible at I think it's a skill to be able to say what you're not good at. And I'm horrible at the defensive aspect of it. So I'm actually going to pass on that part of the question, just because I'd be making up answers, and that doesn't serve anybody well. And like I say, I'm actually proud of being able to say I'm going to pass on this one.
Yes.
Because I think we should all be willing to admit that's not my area of expertise. Where shooters go to recreate the advantage that the defense has taken away. Right now, we're big into creating space, and everybody's keyed on that 3-point line. We all want to shoot threes, and the defense knows it, and so the defense is focused on taking away 3-point shots. We'll almost give up a 2 so that we don't give up a 3. And the counter now is to fake 1 to 3, create space, and then shoot the next. And that's all about just creating force, but then being able to stop that force, like creating enough energy that you can create separation, but then being stable enough when you land to control that force that you created. And those are two very different skills. There are players who are amazing at creating separation and then shoot off balance shots. And there are players who are fantastic at always being balanced, but don't create a lot of force. And the elite are able to do both. I'll speak mostly to the balance side of it. I think that's where we go wrong. I think that has a lot to do with our body posture and our the width of our feet and the way that we use our feet. But then we also need to learn to practice in that kind of environment. And you can't work on your balance unless your practice involves you being off balance. And so I do a ton of drills where I'm literally pushing players and forcing them to not only deal with the energy they create. They think they're jumping to the side. I am, with all the force that my spindly little 175-pound body can create, I am pushing them in the same direction to get them even more off balance, and just trying to get them to figure out the solution for, when I land here, how do I land under control? And so I spend a lot of time on drills like that.
So now, kind of just breaking it down a little bit more, there's obviously been a push to get away from mid-range jump shots. There's still a few coaches that will do it and players that will do it, but obviously, there's a lot of push towards, in the paint and 3-point shots. So kind of, what is maybe your thoughts on the mid-range shot? And then do you do anything different mechanically in teaching a mid-range shot versus a 3, or is it all kind of the same fluid mechanics?
It all kind of ends up being the same, or the principles are the same. There'll be subtle differences, and the subtle differences will change from player to player and situation to situation as well. So it's really hard to give all the variety that would occur in those, because it's just enormous. It branches out not just in one direction, but in all directions. But then there are players who do it really well, and for me, it's this move away from mid-range has created a unique challenge for me as a shooting coach and people like me, where if somebody was a weak shooter that in the NBA was not trusted to make any shot, including free throws, then my first goal becomes, let's make free throws. Let's get that free throw percentage up to 70%. And that becomes the logical first goal. And that first goal still remains for the kinds of players that I enjoy working with. Unfortunately, the second goal used to be, okay, now we're making 72% of our free throws. Can we make in game an open elbow jumper? And that would have been the next seed that I would plant, the next little carrot that I would dangle in front of a player. Can we make that? And unfortunately, teams don't want players shooting that shot. And so the players that I'm working with, I have to go from, okay, making free throws, you've earned trust by making free throws, to now an open 3. And that's a lot harder than an 18-foot jumper. And so that's created a unique challenge for me, whereas, okay, the next carrot is significantly harder than the carrot that I used to dangle in front of players before. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what kind of jumps to mind when you asked it.
All right, so another two-parter here. I'll go. The first part's more of it's both mechanical question.
Sure.
Lefties and righty shooters. Is there any differences in teaching the mechanics? Obviously, feet probably a little bit, right? Different things like that. But when it comes down to lefties and righties, is there any differences in teaching those mechanics that you found?
I will emphatically say no. ... Yes. So there shouldn't be. And I had when probably around 2013, 14, I sort of became obsessed with this a little bit. Like, why is it that lefties all kind of look different when they shoot? And I found I struggled a little bit more to work with lefties, because there's this weird thing that seemed to come along with left-handed shooters, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was asking everybody outside of basketball, like physiotherapists and doctors, and finally somebody came up with an answer that really made sense to why I felt like lefties were a little bit different and a little bit more, not challenging, just a little different to work with. And his answer was, they've grown up in a right-handed world. They've grown up constantly having to make concessions and adjustments for little tiny things that we don't even think about, because the world was built for right-handed people and they have to compensate in some way. And he started to give examples like opening a fridge door. I open a fridge door across my body with my right hand, and a left-hander has to sort of try and make that motion, because I'm trying to describe it because I know we don't have video, but the first thing that I do as a right-hander mimicking a lefty is I sort of tuck my shoulder in to try and pull. I would write in my notebook in school and my shoulder would maintain a neutral position, and a left-hander has to curl their hand around the paper so they don't smudge the ink. And what do? The shoulder turns inward. And all these times, a can opener, I just, again, everything remains neutral, and I just turn. They have to reach around, and what changes? Your shoulder. And so their shoulder muscle, I'm told, or this person explained, develops slightly differently, and everything ends up sort of being this this motion where your shoulder tucks upward, inward, and if you watch most left-handed shooters, that's what they do when they shoot. And so the first thing that I try and do with lefties is open up those shoulders a little bit more and create that neutrality again. And then remember, I'm trying to fight against 20 years of quote unquote muscle memory, which isn't really a thing, but it's a good name for us. And so I have to be patient with these habits, no matter how good a coach I am and how good the drills that we're doing are. I'm not going to quickly win the battle against 20 years of opening fridge doors and writing in notebooks. And so I've got to be patient. So no, they shouldn't be built differently, but then there is a difference. And so once I wrap my brain around that a little bit more, it became easier to work with lefties.
That's a tremendous answer. Like, I never even really thought about that before, but
I'm glad, because it was driving me nuts for literally a year and a half. Anybody that I met who said like, I'm a physiotherapist, I would just become obsessive about, let me ask you this, give me 10 minutes of your time. Let's talk about left-handed people. And finally I got that one answer from I believe he was a physiotherapist just outside of Cleveland.
All right, second part of the question then, same thing on the mechanics. Teaching male and female shooters. Any difference there in mechanics that way or anything like that?
I can emphatically say no, ... yes. So do should there be? No. Like, I don't worry about if people say, women have a little bit wider hips. Okay, I don't worry about that stuff. But what I try and keep in mind, when I was working in Orlando, I had a great reminder of this because I was working with Aaron Gordon, who's 6'9", 220 pounds of just muscle, like takes off his shirt. You can do his human anatomy chart. You can see the definition in every muscle. The dude is strong. He long levers. He's capable of shooting from distance easily. There is enough physical strength there. And then I would go home back to Calgary, Canada, because I've always worked as a consultant where I'm in town with the team and then home for a certain amount of time, and then in town, and then I'd go back and forth. When I was home, I was working with the University of Calgary women's basketball team and a lady named Anmal Matu. And Anmal is 5'2", and I'm guessing in the neighborhood of about 120 pounds. So if we look at their skeleton, they're probably very, very similar proportionately. If we look at those two people standing side by side, Aaron props his elbow up on the top of Anmal's head. Like, the amount of force Anmal can create is a fraction of what Anmal is. And so I do have to kind of keep that in mind. For Anmal, I probably needed to allow negative energy when she was shooting 3-point shots above the break. That 23-foot shot for 5'2", 220 pounds is a lot longer shot than 6'9" and 220 pounds of muscle. And so you might need to, I don't change what I teach necessarily, but I sort of relax my expectations on how much negative energy will I allow a player to create, and how disciplined will I expect them to be in creating it.
So we did want to hit on this with you. We talk to guests all over the world, and we talk about basketball worldwide. And you obviously you host clinics not just in the United States, Canada, but Europe, Australia, kind of all over. Just so for you, what are some things you've noticed about the game of basketball worldwide? And do you feel basketball worldwide is maybe possibly at this point, obviously with soccer, but probably the most well-known sport?
Second part, yeah, like it's caught up. Yeah, everywhere I go, they talk about basketball's booming, and I'll speak to Canada right now. It's the largest purchase. Might be second actually to soccer, but it's very close and has surpassed hockey in Canada. I'll say that again. basketball has surpassed hockey in Canada for the biggest participation sport. And I'm hearing that from people all around the world. In Australia, it's approaching footy, their passion, and football. And in Europe, everywhere basketball has emerged, and almost every area I go to, I probably won't need to meet more than 3 people before somebody says to me, "Coach, we're so glad you're here. Our kids, our players, we just don't shoot the ball well. Like everybody, other people shoot the ball," and every area says that. And so this is a skill that people are focused on around the world and feel like they don't do well. And when I go into every gym, like I can close my eyes and say, are we in Melbourne, Australia, or are we in Grand Prairie, Alberta, Canada? And look at the kids in the gym and say, I have no idea. The habits are all exactly like, oh yeah, I've seen that kid before. This kid has blonde hair and this kid has black hair, but they have the exact same shots and they live on opposite sides of the world. The habits are the solutions that young players find in trying to solve the problem of shooting a ball from distance. Those are universal, and it's really fun to watch.
All right, so we wanted to finish obviously with our last 2 segments, and our first one we call 30-second timeout, and it's kind of your platform to discuss whatever you want to discuss. It could be about yourself, your camps, your family, anything you want to talk about. Kind of the floor is yours for the next roughly 30 seconds.
Okay. Find me at Coach Dave Love on Instagram and Twitter, and then CoachDaveLove.com for my email newsletter, which is free. And then I guess I'm going to use the rest of my time to say, like, whatever you do, chase what you love and figure out how to do more of what you love. To become truly great at something, you need to love it enough that the work that is necessary feels fun and you want to do the work. And then just continually be asking yourself, what part of this do I enjoy the most? And then how can I do more of that and less of the things I don't like? I pay for somebody to do my taxes because as an entrepreneur, I don't like doing my taxes. So give that to somebody else so that I get to spend more time in the gym and just constantly chase doing what you love.
Love it.
That's probably more like 44 seconds, but
that's okay. Awesome advice. All right, we're getting to our quick hitters here. Just kind of rapid fire questions.
Love it. These are fun.
Most of the time, we're not even basketball related. There's a few here and there. First one, food from Canada that you wish was served in the U.S.
There isn't one. Like, we're so similar in the food that we eat. You tipped me off to this question coming, and I'm thinking, like, what is there? I got nothing for this one. That I have nothing.
Is there, okay, then let's tweak a little bit. Is there maybe a chain that you wish you could get when you came to the U.S. that is better maybe than something we have here in the United States?
I'm going the opposite direction. A chain in the U.S. that we don't have a Chipotle anywhere in my city. I Google every 6 months. I'm Googling Calgary Chipotle.
See if there's one.
Like, is something coming? So that's the change I want to make. Get a Chipotle like 5 blocks from my house.
All right, awesome. So we know you don't want to, you don't want to talk too much about the defensive aspect, but just, do you got a favorite defender in the game that you enjoy watching?
Right now, no, but I always enjoyed the brain of Shane Battier. And so, like, he's not a guy that necessarily physically should have been a great defender. Like, he's in some ways he fits the prototype of what we describe as great defender, but in some ways I think he's outside that box. But then the brain was like on overdrive, and that those people always appeal to me, and in whatever realm they're in. The people that are the thinkers and analyzers I love.
All right, salty snack or sweet snack, and then which one?
I hate this. Dang it.
Or you can pick both. I mean, we're
No,
not
I'm
going to
absolutely
be
picking
choosy.
both. I'm absolutely picking both. Right now, I go in waves. I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm 47 years old and I still love candy. But for sweet, I need sour candies, like the sour. I love pretty much anything that is sour for my sweets, which is ironic, weird to say that my sweets need to be sour.
Hour.
But then for salty right now, what are my go-to? Oh, and in Canada, we have ketchup potato chips that are like they're the best flavor of potato chips out there. And
Okay.
so when you come to Canada, buy like you're gonna go, ketchup. This is a little weird, but potato chips are kind of French fries. Don't we put ketchup on French fries?
True.
And everybody that I've given them to, they're like, oh wow, these are good. And now we've gone to the next level where we've got spicy ketchup, and those, and then spicy dill pickle, and those are on high rotation right now in the Love household.
We don't want our kids to get a hold of those, John. Our kids at school, the spicy ketchup.
And anything
Spicy, our kids at school that we teach. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Or does it make them go crazy, or they'll just eat way too much of it? What do you
They'll
do?
just
What do you?
eat it constantly. Just
It's
Yeah.
a fruit group.
bags upon bags of it.
There's one brand that just put out a limited edition ketchup. Doritos put out a limited edition summer ketchup chip, and my wife and I love it. And they said, "Oh, end of summer, they're going away. We're stockpiling. Like we've got 7 bags in the pantry that are going to just be like our winter hibernation treat." So we're very focused. We know what we're doing. We have a plan.
All right. So we got dogs or cats.
This one's a piece of cake. Dogs all day. I grew up with dogs. I grew up with Labrador retrievers my whole life, and they're just a wonderful dog. My wife and I, our first dog was a Shiba Inu, who we loved, but it was a little cat-like. And now we have a little Morkie who's just a bundle of love and affection, and she's awesome. Dogs all day.
All right. If you weren't coaching basketball, you would coach what?
Ooh, man. So I get to coach another sport, but I can't be basketball.
Yep.
Golf.
Popular one.
Yeah. Golf would be the historic answer. And in the last 5 or so years, I'm tilting the scale towards tennis a little bit more, but I know golf better than I know tennis right now. And so I'd be a better golf instructor than I would tennis right now. So I'm picking golf.
I feel like we do get golf. That's a common one.
Also popular one. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So, probably talk to a lot of old men.
Oh, that's true too. All right. So last one, favorite arena that you've ever been in?
Okay, I am proud to say I encourage myself to still have fanboy moments. And I feel like when I lose that joy of, I can't believe I'm here, and it might be really like most people probably don't know that I'm having these moments when I have them, but when I stop having them, it's going to be time to kind of move away, because I think that's the point of living, is to do amazing things. And when you're doing them, you better appreciate them. So Madison Square Garden was amazing. Just like the Madison Square Garden and Staples Center, they light their court differently. Like the court is lit and the stands are more dark, and that was kind of cool. And then the game that I was there at Madison Square Garden for, we looked across the court, and I mean, these are certainly not A-list people, but it was kind of cool to go, oh, there's Kate Upton. Who was Kate Upton? What's the name of the guy that used to be the Apple guy? He was in all the Apple. He played the Mac, and then they'd have the nerdy guy who was the PC.
Oh, yes.
Sort of an actor for a little bit, but
Yes.
it was Kate Upton, that guy, and Taylor Swift. And I'm like, and I joke with my daughters all the time, like, Taylor Swift's seen me work. Like, Taylor Swift has come to see me do my job. She didn't care about it right there, but that's the ongoing joke. And then the other one that jumps to mind is Utah. Utah, the stands, like there's in most arenas built for hockey as well, the stands come down and then there's some space, and then the court begins. And you feel that it might only be 8 feet, but you feel the space. In Utah, the stands come down to the edge of the court, and you feel like the fans are on top of you, and it's kind of cool. So those are 2/3.
I like it. Well, Coach, this was a really fun episode. I think our listeners are going to get a ton of information about shooting. And we really do appreciate your time and taking some time to sit down with us today.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you guys for inviting me on.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, hosted by Todd Zazadil and Jon Plicki. For more show content and upcoming episodes, follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout, or subscribe to our podcast for upcoming episodes. For show inquiries, you can email us at afterthetimeout@gmail.com. You can find all of our previous episodes on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Casts, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts by searching After the Timeout. We appreciate you listening. Tune in next time for more coaching content in-game, out of the game, and anything in between.